Hello and welcome to this evening's UCSF Virtual Alumni Program, UCSF Alumni Author Series, a spotlight on fiction writers. My name is Sarah McClung and I'm the head of collection development at the UCSF Library. I'm very pleased to be moderating this event focusing on UCSF alumni who have published fictional works. Before we start today's program, I'd like to review a few quick housekeeping items to help with your experience. To submit a question during the presentation, please use the Q&A box. Please keep your questions brief to ensure that we can get to as many as possible. Given the size of the audience and the number of questions, our speakers may not be able to answer everything. We hope that you enjoy the conversation. I'd now like to do a short introduction of our authors tonight. Shirley DicKard received her RN from UCSF in 1968. In her eco-novel Heartwood, For Women, For the Earth, For the Future, published in March 2020, she draws from her medical background in pediatrics and rural community health to create a work where she showcases her passion for living close to the land and protecting the earth. Dr. Jim Gottesman graduated from UCSF in 1970. He's a retired urological oncologist who has been writing most of his adult life, although not fiction until he retired. His most recent novel, his sixth, Influenza, published in January 2022, follows Sarah, a young impoverished Jewish woman from Brooklyn who loses her fiance and most of her family during the 1918 Spanish influenza pandemic. Dr. Larry Hill is a retired internist who, after graduating from UCSF in 1967, spent 18 years in private practice in rural Northern California before seeking adventure by moving to Mali, West Africa, to serve as medical attaché in the American Embassy. His latest novel, Baobab, follows a Beverly Hills doctor who moves to West Africa and runs afoul of a ruthless dictator. Welcome to our esteemed panel. I've got some questions to ask our panel before we go to our audience, and we'll rotate through our panel to get their answers. Let's start by getting a bit of information about your most recent books. Could we get a brief synopsis before diving in? Let's start with Shirley. Oh, Shirley, you're on mute still.
Okay, got it. Technology here. At age 74, I wrote my first novel, an eco-novel called Heartwood, For Women, For the Earth, For the Future. And I'll read you the synopsis of it because it just kind of goes a little smoother. Deep in the heart of a small oak writing desk is a legacy that mysteriously connects three family women across centuries in their fight for the Earth's future. There's an ancient woman with disturbing visions of the Earth's demise at the hands of man, sends an urgent message forward in time within the heart of an acorn. As the three women write on the heartwood of the old family desk, each one is influenced by the ancient message as they view mankind's escalating destruction of the natural world through the eyes of their time. So the three women are from the past: Eliza, the 1800s, she came over with a gold rush. Harmony in the 1970s to the present time was part of the Back to the Land movement in the Sierra Mountains. And then Amisha in the year 2075 in the future is a pediatrician in a very dystopic San Francisco who flees the Sierra in search of the homestead. So Heartwood basically speaks of the collective power of feminine energy as these women reach across time to do what must be done. And I want to add that I'm very proud of several awards that I've received, national awards. One was, Heartwood was the winner for visionary fiction and also a finalist for thought-provoking books that illuminate, progress, or redirect thought.
Great, thank you, Shirley. Jim. Could you give us a brief synopsis of your most recent book?
Were you talking to?
To you, Jim.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Well, my book that I published this January, which is my sixth, was inspired by my grandmother, Leah Gottesman. She lost her father, brother, and three sisters in 1 week in Bayonne, New Jersey in 1919. And it's hard to look at the ancestry.com where there's a line of 1919 deaths that go across the line. That inspired me really when COVID hit. I've got to write something about this. And so I wrote a fiction story, but not about my grandmother. It's the story of a young Jewish girl from Brooklyn, Orthodox, who loses her family and her fiance on the same day in 1919. She's destitute, and she answers an ad for a wife from a small shopkeeper in upstate New York. And that's her story. And the story is what happens to her as she heads north to a different place that she didn't know existed with a different religion. And last year I published another novel called An Enemy to Love about a young mother who's raised by founders of a white supremacist group who rejects the dogma and wants to leave, but she knows too much. So it's current stuff that inspires me to write, I think.
Great. Thank you, Jim. And Larry.
I've self-published a couple of books very quickly. The first is called Philanthropist. And the first sentence from that book is something to the effect of 12 hours before Jim Klein killed a young woman on California Street, and 24 hours before his picture appeared on the front of the San Francisco Chronicle, he learned that he had high cholesterol. The second book, and which I'm most proud of, is called Baobab, a story of a doc from California who gets tired of private practice and moves to West Africa, where he and his wife encounter, shall we say, a bloody coup d'etat. Fun story, filled with both tragedy and humor.
Great, thank you, Larry. Let's see here. So our second question, we'll go to Jim first on this one. What came first for you, a love of writing or a love for the health sciences?
Not even close. Health sciences. I did poorly in English in high school and in college. And I was helped by the fact that my handwriting is atrocious. I'm left-handed, and it was just always difficult for me to write legibly. And I just maybe shied away from the writing part of my education. So when I got into medicine and as a resident in urology, I started writing scientific papers, and I learned to write there. I learned to write clear, concise sentences as a doctor. And that really helped me a lot when I started writing fiction, because it's still a sentence. But no, health science was there way before writing.
Larry, do you agree?
Yeah, I didn't do any significant writing. I was in private practice up in rural Northern California, so I was not involved in any research. I did a couple of case studies or something, but I did not write until I ended up in West Africa, and have written a lot since.
How about you, Shirley?
Well, I'll have to say writing, because I've been a storyteller all my life. When I was growing up, I would tell my sisters stories on Saturday mornings. And then when I had two daughters, I made up stories for them. And so I've been told that I have a very active imagination. And I think that was my mother. And I'm not sure if that was good or bad. But anyway, I have a way with words. It's always, no matter what it is. So in high school, you take those career aptitude tests, and to tell you what you should consider for a career. So what came up for me was healthcare or forestry. And my father was a doctor, family doctor, and my mother was an RN, retired. And so it was just assumed that I would go into healthcare, right? And then it was even more assumed, because this is 1963, that I would go into nursing and follow my mother. Nobody asked me if I wanted to become a doctor. Of course, it's 1963. But I've done very well in nursing, and I do a lot of writing, did a lot of writing within the nursing field. But I also have to say that my husband and I live in the Tahoe National Forest, so I actually got to do both of them. But now that I write fiction, I can draw on my medical background. So I kind of am blending them both. And I had the perspective of watching trends over time and then infusing them into my stories, some of the medical issues that I've observed as a school nurse, what's happening to children, what's happening to the environment. So it's kind of been kind of fun.
Wonderful. So similar to that, speaking about your experiences at UCSF, did your time at UCSF shape you as a writer at all, or help influence your stories that you've been writing about? We'll go to Larry first for this one.
To a degree, the first book, the one I mentioned called Philanthropist, has several scenes based, both of them based in San Francisco General Hospital, before the name Zuckerberg was added, long before, shall we say, with some excitement in the mission emergency room and in the newly created ICU. But other than that, I don't think there's anything specific to UCSF that directed me toward writing.
How about you, Shirley? Well, let's see, this is like 50 years ago, right? We were all, but I remember back in nursing school, we were taught to use a holistic approach when we're working with our patients. In other words, to consider health within the greater context of their life, their social, emotional, economic, and the whole picture. And so I do that with my novel as well. And I have three women that kind of provide different aspects of that. So even though I covered lots of health issues in my book, I didn't actually start out writing that way. My book actually started, I think somebody was talking about Jim about being the story, sort of a fictionalized story of your family. Mm-hmm. Hartwood started for me as a biography of my great grandmother, Emily Hoppin, who settled in Woodland. But and she was a pioneer activist for women's issues and so forth. And as I was writing her biography, I was asking, well, what's the bigger story around her life, and what's the impact did her life have on today? And so then I kept looking, like we were taught in school, you just keep looking at the bigger picture, the context in which the story exists or the patient exists. And so then I started writing about me, sort of having a conversation with her because we were both interested in the same thing. So we talked about the past and the present. But then I got visited by the future, and this is where my whole story changed. Where in the middle of the night, about 3 a.m, I had an apparition standing at the foot of my bed. And this is true. She said, she introduced herself as my great granddaughter, not yet born, from the future, named Amisha. And she said, if you're going to write about the past and you're going to write about the present, you have to include the future in your story. So, because we're creating the future that she's living in right now, by the things we're doing and not doing. So, and she was asking for help. So I woke up going, okay, this is the story I want to write. This is the big picture. This is the holistic picture of what I want to write. So I made her a pediatric doctor in San Francisco. Anyway, that kind of got into the medical center again. Actually, she was at the University Hospital on the Hill in San Francisco. So back to the medical center.
And Jim, how about you?
Well, I mean, all of my first 6 novels, there's always a doctor in it. All my protagonists either are doctors or their boyfriends or their husband to be or their whatever, or lovers are married to doctors and they meet through medicine. So just that medicine has been a big part of the background of most of my stories. The one about the flu epidemic doesn't really have the protagonist being a doctor, but it occurs during a pandemic. So that's, if I learned anything at UCSF, it's work your ass off. It's hard. It's not easy writing a novel. And once you start, you finish, and it's that perseverance, I think, that you're taught as a medical student or a nursing student or a dental student. You just got to finish the job.
Mm-hmm. And that's a perfect segue into my next question, Jim. So health sciences professions, as we all know, are notoriously demanding. How do you or did you balance honing your writing craft with your day job? Shirley, we'll go to you first on one.
Oh, okay. Well, how did I balance them? Well, actually, I didn't. Because working and writing are like two different sides of my brain. When I'm working, it was like the left-sided, the linear, logical, analytic, detail-oriented. It's a medical profession, right? We're very exact. And so that's where I lived most of the time when I was working. But in writing, you kind of enter the right side, which is more spatial, timeless, imaginary, creative. And it was really hard to go back and forth between the two. So it wasn't until, the left side kept winning out because it's the stronger side, right? So it wasn't until I retired in 2008 that the right side really opened up, because it didn't have the clamping down of the work side. And I just started getting really creative. I started writing songs and writing poetry and short stories, and the beginnings of Heartwood. And so I've been working on Heartwood since 2008. That was the very beginning of it, but only the last few years have I really been actively working on it. But even in retirement, as we all know, Jim and Larry and everybody who's retired, there's still a lot of work to do. So what I would do to make sure that I got my writing done was I would carve out the first 2 to 3 hours of the morning. I'd get up real early in the morning, like about 5:30 or 6, and it was still dark, and I keep the lights down real dim, and I get a cup of dark French roast coffee, and I would sit at my desk with very dim light in that kind of twilight space, and I would write for 2 or 3 hours, and I got some of the best writing done because I was still in that kind of just imaginary twilight space, and those are golden hours, and that's how I would start my day. But I think when you're a writer, your subconscious is always working.
Lovely. I'm not a morning person, so I'm very jealous, Shirley.
Well, maybe evening. You could try, before you go to bed, those hours before you go to sleep.
How about you, Jim? Did you wait until retirement to start writing?
I didn't even think about writing fiction until I retired. I got married in college. I had my 3 sons before I finished my residency, and I had 7 grandchildren 10 years before I retired. So I had a lot on my plate, and full-time medicine. I mean, I wrote close to 100 medical articles, book chapters. I started writing computer programs, actually sold one, but the thought of writing fiction didn't even cross my mind until I retired. However, with all those kids, I started telling stories to them. And my 3 boys will tell me about them, remind me of the stories I used to tell them. And we'd all get into one bed and I'd make this heroic story, and they were always the heroes in the end. And I did the same thing for most of my granddaughters. We'd have the 4 of us would lie in a king size bed till my wife started yelling that the kids had to go to sleep. And I just make up heroic stories for them. And one of my granddaughters kept saying, "Papa, you have to write these stories out. They're so good." Never did write for children, but the thought that I would tell fiction stories, I think the seed was planted while I was working.
Great. And then Larry, I think you mentioned you started writing when you were in Africa.
Well, I did not do any writing when I was here or when I was in practice up in Eureka, just too busy. But when I graduated college, the president of the university said, "Gentlemen," I was in a guy's school, "whatever you do, don't do the same thing all your life." So although I loved my practice in Eureka, I decided to do something else. So I signed up with the State Department and went to West Africa. One of the things that I was thinking about writing, but one of the things that happened to me was the author Tom Robbins, who you guys may know as Even Cowgirls Get the Blues and another Roadside Attraction. Well, he came to Bamako, Mali, to study his next book on Timbuktu, and he and I had a lot of time together. And he suggested that I might want to take the same approach he did, which is to come up with a single character, a single place, a single general concept, and a first line. No summary, no outline, none of that stuff. So I decided, well, maybe I'll try that. And that was the genesis of this book on Bamako. At the end of my writing, which finished when I was living in Bangladesh, I said, this book's no good. So I put it on the back shelf and didn't do any more writing of that type until I came back to San Francisco, having been retired in 2006, took a course at UCSF in writing, liked what I did with this book, forgetting the name of it, Philanthropist, and said, maybe I'll go back to that other one. And I've done so. And it's worked out really well. I'm just pleased as much.
Great.
Oh, and one other thing is I was on the airplane all the time going between all these countries in Africa and Asia. That gives you a lot of time to write.
Yes, I bet. Jim, I think you started to touch on this a little bit. So the next question I have for all of you, what's a surprising similarity between writing and practicing medicine or nursing? You mentioned they both, require a lot of hard work and dedication.
Who's the question for?
It's for you, Jim.
Oh, sorry.
That's
I'm
okay.
not hearing the Jim part. Okay. I think it's about being passionate. I think when you're a physician, you're passionate about what you're doing. You're passionate about learning. You're passionate about your patients. To me, at least I was. And I think it's the same thing about writing, is you put your passion into it. I try and make my protagonists likable and have passion. And I hope that as a physician, I acted the same way. I wanted to at least make my patients feel like I had passion for their care. And so I think that be likable, be passionate about what you do is similar in writing and in medicine. That's how I approached it.
Great. Larry, what are your thoughts on this one?
The medical profession involves storytelling. We listen to stories all the time. They may be disguised as histories, but they're human stories. And if we're good at it, we also tell the stories of our lives back to some of our patients. This is particularly true in primary care, as I was in. And what is more about stories than writing fiction? The beauty of writing fiction, as opposed to nonfiction, is you can make this stuff up. No one's going to say that's not true, because they're right. It isn't true. But again, storytelling is the key to both of those professions.
Great. And Shirley?
I would like to dovetail on what Larry said, because but I was thinking about this. I thought, when you're one of the similarities between nursing or medicine and writing is you're dealing with arcs, story arcs and character arcs. You start one place and you go to another place, and in between a lot happens, right? And then you're also looking through the lens of the past, present, and future with both your story and your patients. So, for example, if you're interviewing a patient, you might be looking at their past, which is what's their history and what are the underlying causes. And then in the present, you're looking at their presenting symptoms and kind of developing a treatment plan. And then for the future, you're also looking at the desired outcomes. Where do you hope to achieve? Do they want to be pain-free, cancer-free, not depressed, and that kind of thing. So, and that it's not going to be linear either. You start here, you hope you end up over here, but there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, a roller coaster, remissions, setbacks, and so forth. And that's just the human nature. And that, but you also hope at the end that your patient, leaves as a happy individual, but that's not always the case. And I'd say in writing, it's the same thing. If you're going to write good, compelling writing, you always have to have a good, strong character arc and a good, strong story arc. And the character is kind of, where is the character at the beginning? What are their hopes and fears? What do they look like? Where do they live? All that kind of development of the character. And then you have who they are at the end, and hopefully they've grown or changed at the end. That usually makes a good story if they have. And then the story arc is like, probably familiar with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And it's a very common experience that we can all relate to. Is the story opens here, the journey begins, and it ends over here. And a lot happens in between. And that's kind of how I wrote my book. I have the past, present, and future of different characters. And I use them to talk about mankind's destruction of the planet, the underlying causes from the past, the presenting symptoms, which would be, just take a look at the environmental concerns we have today. We've got, it's a long laundry list, right? Climate change and health issues and so forth. And then the future is, where do we want to be, or where do we not want to be in the future? So a lot happens in the way. But anyway, so they both, I think a good, strong patient relationship and a good, strong writing story has both of those strong arcs. I learned a lot about the craft of writing, by the way, in writing the book. I didn't start out that way.
Beautiful. Thank you all for that. How does publishing and writing, the process of publishing and writing for fiction, differ from the writing and publishing process for scholarly works? And we will start with Larry for that one.
Getting a book of fiction published in today's market is very, very difficult. I have not succeeded. I guess that Jim has not succeeded. Shirley, did you get a publisher?
I didn't try. And that's
Okay.
another story, I'll tell you.
I tried my damnedest. I sent my stuff, both of those books, out to dozens of agents. Some of whom complimented it, you need some work, etc., but nobody said yes. So I ended up publishing myself, first through Amazon and then through another company. So nobody is fighting for my book as they would be if they're a publisher, so it makes it very difficult. The other thing is, as the people who are watching this webinar can recognize, we're old folks. The three of us are not kids. And I'm only guessing that a good agent is saying, if I'm going to get someone to publish their fiction, I want them to make sure they've got more fiction in them.
Mm-hmm.
And I would guess that me at 79, when I tried to do Baobab, ran up against that. Could be that it's no good, although I think it's quite good. But I suspect the agents weren't very interested in a 79-year-old first-time author.
Shirley, what are your thoughts on the differences?
Well, writing for fiction and writing for scholarly works, again, are two different styles of writing. And I think I referred to this earlier. But when you're writing professionally, like in your medical profession, it's supposed to be really well researched and solid logic and rational and detached. Use the passive voice only. And it usually is peer reviewed and published through established reputable sources. And it can take several years just for that publishing process through the more professional medical avenues. And again, that's kind of left brain stuff, right? And when I worked as an executive director of a nonprofit, Children's Health Issues, I wrote a lot of grants and applications and reports and things like that. It was all just very tight writing. But then when I started writing fiction, I found that, again, that's kind of right-sided, right? I had to unlearn all that professional style that I was getting really good at. And I had to learn that it doesn't, in fact, you don't want it to be tight and solid. It just has to be plausible, right? And I learned that you don't have to account for every step along the way. It's just, you can make leaps and give the readers credit for filling in the details and for getting it, give them some credit. And readers love to be surprised. They love plot twists. And one of my daughters said, Mom, it's like you put Easter eggs in the book for people to discover here and there. And some people discover them and some don't, The other thing is you can use the active voice. You can insert yourself in if it's that kind of a story. You can use the I, first person. But even when I was doing scientific descriptions or historical descriptions, they were plausible because I did the necessary research on, say, future projections of the sea level rising in San Francisco or the forest fires, wildfires burning California. I did a lot of studies so that what I did seemed plausible enough, but it didn't have to be. I mean, I would never pass the peer review test on any of these. And then to get to Larry's point, with when you're writing fiction, you have two choices. You have the traditional publishing house, which there's only 5 left of the main ones. There's a lot of smaller ones, or you can self-publish. And I watched a lot of people like Larry, a lot of writing friends who wanted to go the traditional publishing route, which is what everybody wants because there's a prestige to it and a support. And I watched them put out queries and try to get an agent, and they get an agent and they try to get the book bought by publishing houses. 2 years later, they still hadn't published. And so I thought, I'm just going to skip that stage and I'm just going to self-publish. And it was a steep learning curve, a lot to learn. But in the end, I had full control over my work and I got the book that I wanted to write. So.
Thank you, Shirley. And Jim, what differences have you noticed?
Yeah, I actually did publish a lot of journal articles, while I was practicing, and I did a fair amount of clinical research. The writing is different, but a sentence is still a sentence. You can't give opinions. You can't think about things. You can't waffle here and there. You just have to tell the story, sort of like the beginning of Dragnet. But the journals have total control over what they publish. It does go to editors and they decide whether they publish it or not. If you don't get into that journal, then you submit it to maybe another journal. And if the work is good, they'll, I was pretty successful getting it done. But I ran into the same problem Larry did. I did look for an agent and I did look at publishers and I went to some pitch fests where you pitch your book. And thank God, one agent finally just said to me, honestly, you're just too old. I said, we really want somebody who's just graduated college with an MFA from Yale, who's going to write for 50 years and will publish 1,000 books. And really, how many books do you have in you? And I mean, I have done 6, but I think if they'd have known that, maybe I'd have been more successful, finding a publisher. But in the end, I just said, I'm just do it myself. I found I'm pretty computer literate. So I thought publishing, and I did it through Amazon. I thought it was pretty easy, actually. I created my own covers. I did my own formatting. And it cost me nothing to do it. And in the Amazon platform, you write the book, you publish it, doesn't cost you a penny, and the book isn't published until somebody buys it. So they must have a printer the size of Cleveland somewhere, because when you click buy, all of a sudden the book is printed. And so the paradigm has just changed completely. The one thing that's kind of interesting, when I wrote fiction, I started showing my drafts to friends, a lot of friends. I mean, I didn't care how many people read the books, and I got feedback, and I thought that was fabulous. It helped me. I have heard from some writers that if you show it to somebody and they give you they tell you something, then it's their writing too. And I never believe that. I think it's still your own writing. I will admit that of all the papers I wrote scientifically, I tried to show them to my partners. Not one of them would read the stuff. So it was a lot easier sending fiction to friends than medical articles to my partners. But it's so different. I mean, just think about it. When you're writing a fiction story, you can actually write what the protagonist or anybody has in their mind. What are they thinking? I mean, you can't do that in a scientific article. And so it's fun, really is fun. But I self-published.
Can I throw in one quick comment to anybody who's interested in writing? I would encourage them to join a writers group. I have for several years been in a group of 5. And we get together every 3 or 4 weeks. And prior to getting together, we send our stuff over so that they will have read it. And then we spend an hour and a half bitching and moaning or praising the other guy's book. And it's really effective if, as you go along, to get people to help you with the process.
Great, thank you for that, Larry. Shirley and Jim, do you have similar experiences with writing groups?
I did do a writing group before my first book. I was twice as old as any two of the people in the group combined. I didn't understand what happened. Most of them were doing sci-fi and fantasy stuff, and I didn't relate to it at all. And I ended up going a couple times, and we were in a different world. And so I didn't continue it. I don't have any friends that are writers, really. And I feel badly about that. And I probably would have loved being in a group, and I would have enjoyed it. But no, I haven't been able to find anybody to write with.
Yeah, and I have been a member of a number of writing groups along the way, and they've been very supportive. Writing groups can be iffy. You know, sometimes you get people that are very vicious in them, and then you end up feeling very demoralized. That never happened to me, but it was always other people's experiences along the way. So you have to kind of be very careful with the writing group, but they can be also very supportive. And they can also be blindsided by your book and fall in love with your book so that they don't see the things that, say, a professional editor would. So you have to kind of balance that out. You know, you can't love your book too much, but it keeps you going too, because every week, every 2 weeks, however often you meet, you have to have something ready. And you get some good feedback about what people like, what resonates with them, what stays with them. And then the parts they didn't understand, I didn't get that, you know, and so it's very helpful feedback. The other thing I did was I had when I was somewhere along the line, the story was complete. I had about 10 beta readers who I printed up the book and had them read the book with a list of questions that I wanted feedback on. And so what they would do is they would give me honest feedback, because that's what I wanted. I wanted to know where the book was stuck or where it wasn't good, and also where it was. And so that was really helpful. And when you have 10 opinions, you can then see where the weight is. You don't get demoralized by one person saying it was bad when 9 people, you know, like that section. So there's lots of ways of getting help as an independent writer, and but it doesn't end there. And I think it should continue all the way through the publishing process, where you actually get professional level editors, proofreaders, and so forth, if you can. It's important.
Great, thank you for that. And thank you for all of your answers so far. We're going to switch over and get to some of our audience questions. If you haven't already, please submit your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll work on getting those answered. So let's see what we've got here. Since you all mentioned that you have self-published your books, part of self-publishing a book, you are also on the hook for promoting your own work. So how much work is it? And do you enjoy that part of being an author? And any of you can jump in on this one.
Well,
go ahead.
I know this is that Zoom moment of like, you know, what do we do? I'll just jump in here. Promoting is a lot of work. It's like running another business. And there's a myth that when you publish with a publishing house, that they do all the publishing, they do all the promoting for you. That's a myth. They don't do that anymore, unless you're, you know, one of the top names in writing. So even if you go through a publishing house, you have to promote your own book. You have to do your book readings, your book signings, your launches, your book clubs, and all that. And I have a website that's part of my promotion. It's shirleydickkard.com. And I put up a lot of the background about writing the book and my research. I put that up on the website. And I also have a blog that's on the website where I talk about the topics that come up in Heartwood, you know, about environmental concerns or health concerns and so forth. And then I also promote my email, which is heartwoodnovel@gmail.com, heartwoodnovel@gmail.com. So people can contact me and we have discussions, and that leads to, you never know where it's going to lead to, but it is a lot of effort. It's fun, but it's a lot of effort to promote yourself. And it's not always my nature either.
It's a lot of work if you really want to promote your book. I did one book signing at a local bookstore, and I enjoyed it. I invited a lot of my friends, so it was packed. But then about a week after that, I think I went to a book signing at a university bookstore, and it was a very famous baseball player who was signing books. I think it was Pete Rose, I think. And there was nobody there, and he was just sitting alone. And I said, I don't want to ever do that. I don't want to ever be sitting alone in a bookstore. And so I said, no, I'm going to promote it by just telling my friends about it, and the friends can tell their friends. And if somebody invites me to a book group, I'll come to it. But for the most part, since I'm really not trying to make money doing it, I just enjoy writing it and creating it. I don't want to spend a lot of money promoting it, because I don't want to go to Columbus, Ohio in February and sign books and get stuck somewhere. I don't know. I mean, but no, I haven't made a huge effort to, other than putting it on Facebook and putting it on Instagram and sending a letter to everybody on my database.
I sing Jim's song. I don't like the work of marketing. And fortunately, those of us who are retired as healthcare professionals don't need it to put food on the table. Heaven forbid that I was a young author who only did that. So I too send it to everybody I know on Facebook and others, and I get a lot of positive stuff, but they're all from doctors and diplomats. I haven't been able to crash the market of people who have never heard of me. And I guess I could do that, but I'm not sure I'm anxious to do so. I love writing. I sit at the computer and laugh and cry and have just a great time. But I'm not F. Scott Fitzgerald.
That passion again that Jim mentioned earlier, how it's such an integral part of writing. And if you don't have passion for promotion, then yeah. Great. Okay, so actually this is a great segue to the next question. What part of telling the story gives you joy?
I think getting a letter, a note, an email, a text from somebody, I read your book, I loved it. It moved me, I cried, I laughed. I think it must be like being an actor at the end of a performance, and you get a standing ovation and they're clapping, and how much joy must give them. And that's what I enjoy. I enjoy getting feedback from people who read a book and said it touched them. So that's it.
But creating characters, people that are sort of like people you know, people who are totally unlike anybody you know, people who like your wife, even the dogs in your house. That's great fun to fictionalize that stuff. Again, I just think writing is a ball. And if I don't make $1 million, that's just fine.
Yeah, I agree with both Jim and Larry about the passion. It's an end in and of itself. Writing is an end by itself, and you're not going to make money unless you're lucky. But one of the things, it's an interesting question, because I was thinking, well, when do I really feel joyful? And one of the times is when I'm stuck. I've written myself into a corner, and I don't know how to get out of it. I don't know how to help this character. And what usually happens is I'll go to sleep, go to bed, And in the middle of the night, I'll wake up, just like that apparition of my great granddaughter in the future. I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I've got the answer. It's like, it's there. Okay. And then I get up in the morning and I write it all out. And it's like, I would never have thought of it myself. And I'm just tickled because thank you to the universe or the muses that are helping me. So that is one of the times when the writing process is very joyful.
I've had similar moments in the shower. One of the shower thoughts, like, oh no, I need a pen and paper. Got to get this down. Okay, there's a question specifically for Jim. Would you consider writing a children's book?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would. I mean, I've thought about it a little bit. Right now, although this is not really part of the question, I've written 2 screenplays and working on a third. And comments from friends of mine that have read every one of the books have said, boy, I'd love to see this made into a movie. And, you know, I've got the time and the wherewithal, and I decided, let's try writing a screenplay. It is completely different. It's a completely visual platform. You can't write what people are thinking. You have to show everything. There's no telling it. Yeah, I could see writing we'll see how this goes with my screenwriting for a while. But I might love to write a children's book. My wife just wrote one. And I thought it was really well done. It was nice. So yeah, I might do it.
Awesome. Sounds like there might be a good collaboration opportunity there with your wife. All right. Who is your favorite character you've created, and did anyone inspire them?
Okay, I can jump in. I don't have one favorite character. I have 3 favorite characters. You know, my three protagonist women. But the one from the past, Eliza, she is inspired by my great grandmother, Emily Hoppin, who was a pioneer activist. I think I mentioned her. Lived in the Woodland, Yolo area. And when I first started researching her, I thought she was, well, you know, I have her scrapbook and I have her speeches and a lot of things. And the more I researched her, the more impressed I was about her. And so then I had to fictionalize her because I wasn't writing a story about her per se. So I changed her name from Eliza to Emily to Eliza. And I fictionalized her, which is always kind of challenging because I wanted it to be true to her life. And yet there were things when you're writing fiction, like Jim said, you can write whatever you want. So I was able to have her be the character that I needed in the story in various places. But for the most part, I was able to tell her biography through this fictional story. At least the beginning and ending of it was fictionalized, was true. So my original goal was to write her biography. So I kind of did, but I got to know her really, really well and know her better than just the facts and figures about writing biography. I got to kind of get underneath her skin and kind of understand what she was all about. So yeah, she was my favorite one.
My favorite one is a person I'm writing about now in my new book called My Mother and Mickey Mantle. This is Helen Rosenthal, a doctor's wife, whose life, as far as she is concerned, is just horrible. So she has a brief encounter with the baseball player Mickey Mantle and decides, I can do a lot better with this life. So the whole book is a saga of her leaving her husband and 3 children behind and moving first to Washington and then to Chicago and now to Hollywood, where she's in the movie business.
Wow.
And this woman, as you might imagine, has really developed. And interestingly enough, writing a woman's part by a man is not that easy, but it's worked out well.
I was waiting for you to tell her she was a baseball player.
The baseball fan.
A baseball fan.
But
Yeah. Well, all of my books have strong female protagonists, and I found it easier to write for a female than it was for a male. And I don't know why. And it just, that's the way it came out. And if I had a favorite, it would be my first, which is a girl named Emma, who, and I think my first book probably was not as well written as the other ones because it was my first attempt at it. But I liked the story, and I like the fact that I got feedback. So she's kind of a favorite of mine. It's about a girl who grows up on a winery in Eastern Washington, has a tragic event, develops post-traumatic stress syndrome, and is rescued by a doctor from Seattle who gets her. Her family doesn't like who the doctor is, or his family, and she has to fight her way back into the business, or the wine business, which she loves. But I think your first protagonist, I think, is always your favorite because that's what starts you to write the second one.
Great answers. I love them all. What are you all reading right now? Do you have any favorite authors?
My favorite author is Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And my favorite book of all times was Love in the Time of Cholera, which I'm in a book group also, and none of the other old guys in our book group have ever read this, and I'm really excited to see them do so. And 100 Years of Solitude is another just wonderful book.
Right now I'm reading screenwriting books. It's a whole, it's like going back to school. And I am taking extension classes online for screenwriting, and so I haven't had time to read anything this last year. I used to read a lot when I was writing, but see how the screenwriting goes. If anybody out there is a producer wants to look at my scripts, let me know.
So I just started a book by Barbara Kingsolver, who's one of my favorite writers because she always talks about current social issues. And it's Sheltered. I think it's called Unsheltered. Being unsheltered. And I've just started it, so can't talk about it, but she's one of my favorite writers.
Is that the one about the butterflies?
No, that's what is that one?
What is
It's when it came after that.
Oh, that was, yeah.
Yeah,
What is it? Anybody know the name of the butterfly one?
I can see the picture of the cover in my mind, but I can't remember the name of it. Flight Behavior, I think is what it's called. Flight Behavior.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a big Kingsolver fan as well. Yeah.
I didn't want to come out as a Luddite. I did finish recently the last thing he told me, which was a real interesting book about this relationship, and then the guy disappears. It was well written.
It's a thriller. Is it like a thriller or a mystery?
Yeah, but kind of like my book, so I liked it.
Great. Let's see. Oh, is there any interest in leading a virtual writing club for fellow alumni?
That's a pretty good idea. You don't want a book club to be too big. I have a friend who's in a book club with 18 members, and that makes no sense. 4, 5, 6 are the right numbers for book clubs. And, maybe it's worth doing if there were 6 people who were so inclined.
So is it a virtual book club for reading books or for writing books?
So the question is about a writing club, a virtual writing club.
Yeah, well, that could be interesting.
Yeah, I think that'd be interesting. Everybody's you can't go through 40 years of medicine without having a ton of interesting stories. It's just impossible. I mean, it's just impossible. There's just too many good stories out there. And I've heard somebody say that only 1 out of every 100 people that start a book actually finish it. It might be a little larger than that, but I think a lot of people will tell me, yeah, I started writing a book, but I whatever. And I think they're missing the boat. It's not about how well the book is written. It's getting the story down on paper, and you can edit it forever. But once you start, finish the story. Don't edit backwards. Put the story down on paper, no matter how poorly it's written, finish it. And I think my surgical personality fit into that. You know, you start something, you finish it. And I think people don't, and they could if they wanted to, because there's a lot of great stories out there that we'll never know about. And I'd be part of a writing group. I'd help people.
Awesome. All right, we've got time for just one last question. And please share with the audience what's next for you. Are you in the middle of writing new books? Do you have any author events coming up? Any exciting collaborations you want to tell us about?
I'm waiting to get Helen Rosenthal back to her kids, and I'm not sure how I'm going to do that. I'm just having a ball writing this book. Yeah, I've already got about 350 pages in it. Obviously, it has to be edited out of that. The other thing I'm working on, I finished a book on, it became a courtroom thriller on physician-assisted suicide. And conceptually, it's really good. I'm not sure the execution has been great, so I may redo that and try to get that self-published. I'm having a great time doing this stuff. Yeah. Unlike Shirley, I don't get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And so I don't write every day. I wish I did, but I don't. There are just too many other things to do in life. But when I do, I sure have a ball.
Yeah. I'm a binge writer. I'm not like Shirley. I'm not at all. I have to be, and I can write 12 hours in a day and then not write anything for a week. And I do a lot of my thinking at night. I really do. I put the pen down, I go to sleep, and I go to sleep thinking about the story. And every night I think about it differently. And in the morning, sometimes I have an answer, sometimes I don't. And I don't write till I have an answer. So I'm a binge writer. As I said, a lot of my books are really great stories. And so what I'm doing now is trying to take two of the books and write screenplays for them, one for television and one for the big screen. It's very, very hard to take a novel of 400 pages and put it into a 100-page screenplay. It's completely different, but it's a journey, and I'm enjoying doing it. So, and I've got the stories. I just have to put them down on, put them down and put them in the big screen.
Yeah, I've got several things. I always have something coming up. This next thing is I'm meeting with a bunch of young environmentalists that are working to save the rivers, and they love my book. They call it sort of a manual for environmental activism. I have so many different audiences for this book because of medicine, environmental history, but anyway, so the book's been out for a couple of years, and so I'm kind of thinking, well, maybe it's time for like your next baby kind of thing. And so what might be my next book is a collaboration with my husband, who actually graduated from dental school in 1967 there at UC San Francisco. That's where we met. But when he was in dental school and he graduated and went to Vietnam, I was finishing up my last year of nursing. And so we wrote letters back and forth to each other, like 2 or 3 times a week. There was no texting or anything like that back then. And we each saved all the letters. So I've been transcribing them and kind of seeing what's in there. There's stories of Vietnam, stories of San Francisco, war protests, summer of love. I mean, it's a very active time back in the 60s. And then compared now, 50 years later, we're reading the letters to each other. And we've got COVID, and we've got, a war brewing with Putin, and, lots of activity now. So I might do something fiction or nonfiction, kind of working with those two eras, with using the letters as a bridge. We'll see.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing your experiences and taking the time to chat with us tonight about your books. And thank you also to all the alumni for your great questions that you submitted this evening. You can purchase any of the books that were discussed tonight on Amazon, or you can order them through your local bookstore. And we'll end the evening there. Have a great night.